Welcome to Turek Books Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Joshua Turek. We're never going to read all the books we want, but when someone tells us about a book, that's its own valid form of experiencing it. Our guests come in to talk about the books that left lasting marks on them as readers, and that becomes a springboard to who they are, who I am, and maybe who all of us are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And who knows, maybe you'll end up grabbing a book or two. Maybe you've read some of them and it's nice to hear someone else talk about them. We want this to be like a book club, but without the guilt. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Turek Books. Thank you to everyone who showed up to my poetry workshop last weekend, November 8th and 9th. I don't know when this episode's going to air, but it was really fun. One of the more fun things I've done in a long time. I'm going to do more. Our guest today, I'm really excited to have him here. He's the author of the just-released book, Hellbent. He's a public theologian, and if you've been on the internet and you appreciate perspectives on masculinity, faith, politics, then you'd appreciate him. Brian Recker, how you doing?
What's up, Joshua? Good to be here, man. Do you like Josh better? Should I shorten it?
Oh, either one. Yeah, you're now a podcast guest, which makes you my friend. So, Josh.
Good to be friends, Josh. I've enjoyed your stuff as well for a long time, and I have your poetry book, which my girlfriend got me, and I've really enjoyed that. The first one.
That's so cool. Thank you. Yeah, and I have your new book. I started reading it the other night when it arrived. It's really good. You're a really good writer. You know, I don't come from a faith background at all, and yet it's still fascinating the way you've already laid it out. So, I'm really excited to dig into that. Did you grow up a reader? Are you a reader? What's your book life like?
Yeah, I was a big library kid growing up. So I was homeschooled, growing up in fundamentalism. We didn't have cable television. I didn't have a lot of access to television. My parents really limited what I was allowed to watch. And so I did read a lot. I don't know how successful I was in this, but I was really into reading the good stuff. So I remember looking up what won the Caldecott Awards and the Newbery Prizes, the different sort of children's book awards. And I would come home with the stack of all the ones that I could find. So yeah, and I mean nothing too highbrow, but I loved. I really got into science fiction as well when I was a kid. I've tried to recover some of that as an adult, the fiction. I feel like lately it's hard to make time for fiction. I usually only read fiction on vacations. So I mostly read nonfiction now, and it can feel like work. But yeah, I did grow up a big reader. Philip K. Dick was my favorite author in high school, if that kind of gives you an idea of what I was into at the time.
There's a common thread among my guests of the last 6 months of Philip K. Dick. So it definitely does. So growing up fundamentalist, as you said, your parents still allowed literature into the home, even if it kind of was,
Yeah, they didn't check the books, I guess. They checked movies, and I did have, I brought in band movies. I remember I had, my dad went through my drawers and found my DVDs. I had Fight Club hidden in my drawer along with some other rated R movies on DVD. And I remember he sat me down because you know how they used to have the chapter names in the front of the DVD cover? It would they used to name every chapter of the movie. That's an art form that we've lost. And in the front cover of the Fight Club DVD, one of the titles, I think, of the sex scene in the movie was Sport Fucking. And I will never forget my dad sitting me down saying, "Sport fucking, Brian? Do you really think that this is what you should be watching?" And me sitting there absolutely not. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I can't get more antithetical to procreation fucking than sport fucking.
Right. You're not supposed to do that for sport, just for, duty.
Yeah, and it's not a game. What an ultimate DVD. Yeah, and they also had the director's commentaries, which were super fun. Everyone mourns those, but you're right, the chapters. So yeah, you're a reader. You gravitate toward it, the sci-fi, and then were you reading a lot to inform the book you just wrote, or was that more of a singular mission focusing on your perspective?
No, I did. I mean, I started reading while I was an evangelical pastor for 8.5 years, and from 2012, I finally put in my I resigned in 2020, at the end of 2020. After that year, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. There were a few years where I was I don't know, trying to make it work. And that was the year that really opened my eyes. Like, I need to get out of here. But I began deconstructing hell while I was still a pastor. I really 2015 with the rise of Donald Trump was the moment that gave me permission to rethink things. I don't know if I would have put it in these words at the time, but in retrospect, what basically happened was I saw that if evangelicalism as a movement didn't have the moral discernment to see through Donald Trump, and if they thought that was the guy, like I didn't know everything. I was actually very politically naive at that time. I was not super into politics, but I knew enough to know like that's a bad guy. And if you think that's a good guy, then you're missing something on a scale that is beyond what I thought. Like I thought maybe there were some issue, but no, like we're on really different moral wavelengths. And that was the first time that I really felt on a very different page and very much at odds with the movement that I was a part of, which gave me permission to kind of ask what else are they wrong about? And hell was the thing that was most concerning to me as a Christian. That was the thing I liked least about being a Christian. I've always been into Jesus, and very few people that I meet that are deconstructing are like, yeah, I had to walk away from this thing because turns out Jesus is just like very problematic, actually. Like, that's usually not the issue. There's a lot of other issues, abusive churches, systemic issues, certainly, but theologically, one of the big ones is punitive theology, the idea that everybody's not a Christian is going to go to hell. That I never sat right with me, but it felt like it was required. But I began to really read everything I can get my hands on from, I would say around 2017 is when I really did a lot of that. I've read probably, over a dozen books theologically about different perspectives on hell and the afterlife from primarily a Christian perspective, but varying perspectives that inform that. And then really though, the big thing was getting out, because from within the institution, it's very hard to change. You can change to a degree, but you are very aware of the boundaries. And those boundaries are policed not always in very explicit ways, but certainly relationally. I knew the costs, and I don't think people that are inside of it are really aware of the ways that they're censoring themselves because of that institutional and relational pressure. I wasn't aware of it until I left. And then it was like, oh, I can actually think these thoughts now. And so
Mm.
that let me go even further with some of the thoughts that I was thinking. And I felt like, I mean, there's other books out there that question the Christian story about hell, but to me, none of them quite went far enough because what I really was feeling was one of the reasons this was so hard to take out. Hell is sort of like a Jenga block in Christianity that's like very load bearing. Like if you pull it out, the whole thing is going to topple. And so it's not just like changing your mind about this one thing, like, oh yeah, maybe everything else is true, but there's no hell. Because if there's no hell, that kind of takes away the whole reason for what Jesus was up to. For many Christians, they think about the whole thing as an afterlife based transaction. And so it was a very hard piece to remove until I really dug deep into what is spirituality all about. Is it about avoiding punishment in the next life, or is it about building the beloved community in this life? And so for me, there was a lot of rebuilding that had to occur kind of structurally behind the scenes in addition to hell in order to, and that's really what I wanted to do with this book was not only just say, hey, maybe the Bible says some other things about hell, but actually zooming out, many of us received a punitive spirituality, like at its very core. And so God was a punisher. I deserve to be punished. Other people deserve to be punished. And that was laced into really just the way that we thought about human nature and what life was all about. And so it was yeah, I felt like I wanted to go really deep into some of that stuff. And so that's kind of where the book came from.
Yeah, God, that's so much stuff. Your reality changed. Was that overwhelming or energizing?
Yeah, it was both. There was a lot of excitement in leaving, but it was also really scary. I've always been the very even keeled person. Like even yeah, like when people would tell stories about depression and anxiety, I was never somebody who really like I would empathize, but I never really got what they were talking about. It didn't. I just had never had that experience. I experienced anxiety for the first time after I left pastoring. I got on anxiety meds in 2021. I couldn't sleep. I've experienced depression. I've experienced everything in the last few years because, and that's one of the reasons deconstructing and leaving those systems can be so challenging is you're not aware of all that they're doing for you. And even if you see through them, when you begin to see like, oh, a lot of this is fucking fake. Like there's a lot of illusions here, but they're useful illusions. And it's really hard to take apart something that is providing so much for you. so much safety and belonging, but a lot of that was not based on reality, and it also was based on the need to exclude others. And so in order to become inclusive, I also lost some of the things that made me feel safe and were really grounding my identity. So it was a pretty and I do feel like I'm coming back into myself a little bit, but I don't know that I'll ever be who I was, because there is a more um, it kind of reminds me, there's all those stats about how like women are more liberal than men, but they're also like the more liberal women are, the more like mentally unwell they are. And like conservatives will share these stats that like progressive women have more depression and anxiety than conservative women. And the answer to that is like, yeah, because when you have your eyes open to reality, it can fuck you up. But that's not a reason to close your eyes.
Right, that's a reason to attempt to change reality.
Nothing's more depressing than being an anti-capitalist in a world where that's probably not going to change in our lifetime.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that to me is the illusion I grapple with, is growing up in LA in this ultra capitalist playground that pretended like it had a heartbeat, but ultimately was there to serve capital in a very extreme way. And lately I've been thinking how the one good part of being disillusioned is you no longer live in illusion. But with that, you're in wild territory. Yeah, like you said, you're like stepping into, I mean, it's terrible to always bring it back to the Matrix, but they made a great movie. And I think as a touch point for this conversation, you just look at
Really
the
holds up
Matrix.
too. That was the first DVD I ever got. Were
Okay.
we on air when we were talking about our DVDs, or no? Was that before?
But yeah, we were. Yeah, the Fight Club.
Yeah, Fight Club and Matrix. That was another one in the underwear drawer that my dad found. I think the Matrix is in there too. But he wasn't mad about that one because it doesn't have any sex. He was like, "Well, it's only
Right.
rated R for violence," so he let me keep that one.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, that's how they got that movie made, was they promised a great action film, and it was revolutionary at the time, but embedded with that is like such a it's interesting how both of those movies are very much about seeing through systems and the fallout of seeing through those systems, Fight Club and The Matrix, and that those, even in your upbringing, were in your drawer. Like what a symbolic thing.
I did not know what The Matrix was about at the time, but it is true. So it's funny, Christians love that movie, actually. They use it a lot of times in their sermons. I've heard pastors use The Matrix in sermons a lot, and they're
Mm,
kind of talking about, yeah, the world is the Matrix, and their sort of version of Christianity is like seeing it. So they'll co-opt that, not really recognizing that unfortunately Christianity in America, especially white forms of evangelicalism, dominant forms of Christianity, are used to really, they're the empire's favorite religion. I mean, I say all the time, nobody loves afterlife focused fear-based religion and really Christianity more than billionaires and corrupt politicians, because they're like, yeah, you worry about getting your theology squared away so you can go to heaven when you die. We're going to go ahead and exploit this one and only earth. Like, you leave the earth to us, we'll let you have everybody's soul. They're fine to make that deal. Um, and it's like, yeah, you live in the Matrix, and we're going to. So yeah, I actually watched that movie with my son a few months ago, and I tried to explain to him something of the anti-capitalist nature of it, but I don't think he totally got it. We'll have to revisit it in a few years.
yeah, it's going to be you're up against a lot. You're up against the whole shape of a society, and you're right. Religion, Christianity specifically, really reinforce that capital society. But it's interesting. I was reading Debt by David Graeber. I've been reading Debt by David Graeber for 2 years, and
Oh my God, I gave up on that one. I'm proud of you.
yeah, slow
I,
going, slow going.
I did.
But
I
he,
was enjoying it, but it was like, oh, I feel like I've been reading it forever, and I barely read any. I got overwhelmed. I quit. I do quit books a
it,
lot.
that's fair. Yeah, it's not good for your self-esteem as a reader to read David Graeber, but every page is really great. It takes a lot of work. And yeah, he talked about how a lot of our religions sprung up around new markets, new marketplaces, and they were used to govern those markets. The way they coincided with those emerging markets really makes a lot of sense, because yeah, as all the points you brought up, how they build in a moral code to the marketplace that yeah allows the rulers of that marketplace to oftentimes exploit us. So yeah, I don't know, just getting into the books, I guess. I'm curious about the books you brought. Do you have them on
Oh
hand, or are
yeah.
you talking
Man, I'm
about?
so boring. Like, I feel like I wish I had fun books. I'm like, when's the last fiction book I even read?
No,
But
no,
so,
no direction
so
is
the books
wrong.
that I have are kind of they're very like theologian coded, I guess. But you brought me on. So the
Yes.
ones that I maybe have been most impactful just this year, Richard Rohr has this book called Adam's Return: The Five Promises of Male Initiation. And so we're in a I don't know if you've heard, Josh, but we're in a male loneliness epidemic.
Yes.
And so this book is about masculinity, and masculine specifically is about masculine spirituality. So spirituality for men, and that can sound really corny. I don't know if you've heard like you've had the pleasure of not being raised in evangelicalism, but like male Christian conferences are the dumbest thing of all time. Like they'll have like monster trucks, and like they always have just the hokiest bullshit, and like yeah, and then they're like shooting up like whoever comes like you can be entered to win this AK-47. It's like all that stuff, and that's like male spirituality. So this book is kind of the opposite of that in many ways, and he like is looking at Rohr looks at common themes from male initiations throughout cultures and history and pulls some overlapping themes that we see and kind of talks about how empty our culture is and how little it offers in terms of initiation. And so you have this kind of perpetual adolescence. Most men are not men. They in the sense that they haven't really taken responsibility for their own emotional life and really the lives of others. And so I found this book really, it's the kind where after I read it, I want to reread it already, and I probably will. It's a very countercultural sort of view of male spirituality that also doesn't despise the feminine. Most male Christian shit is very much about how men and women are different, and that typically, like a lot of times, it's emphasizing these particular traits of men as opposed to women. Whereas Rohr really talks about the health that actually the way that men are going to be healed is by learning to embrace those parts of themselves that they often were told to cut off, which I have seen in myself as well. So if you're kind of a man who's wrestling with what does spirituality look like, what does health look like, I found that book really helpful. The other one I brought is this biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer by Renate Wind, A Spoke in the Wheel. Well, Bonhoeffer is a theologian. He was a German theologian during the rise of the Third Reich who critiqued Hitler. He actually participated in an assassination plot against Hitler, even though he had a more nonviolent spirituality. So that was kind of an ethical dilemma that he wrestled with, which is always really interesting, how he got there. And then he was ultimately caught and he was executed just days before the concentration camp was liberated, actually. So he died in Nazi Germany. But his writings have continued to be very influential, and evangelicals have really tried to co-opt him because he's such an interesting theological figure. So there's this one really horrible evangelical leader named Eric Metaxas, who's a total MAGA guy, but he wrote a biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer where he basically tried to make him sound like an evangelical. But when you actually go into the story, you can see how it's so much of the same thing happening again, and he opposed the kind of Christianity that we're seeing that's propping up the MAGA movement right now. It's kind of a real recapitulation. So I feel like there's a really timely book. It's called A Spoke in the Wheel because he has a quote where he basically says that there comes a time where like following Jesus, it has to be more than just pulling people out from under the wheel. We've got to stick a spoke in the wheel itself, and that's how he kind of got to that place of deciding that, yeah, he's going to kill Hitler as a nonviolent pastor. It didn't work, unfortunately. They didn't get him.
Damn. Yeah.
But yeah, it's really short too. I read it pretty quickly. I felt like it moved pretty quick. So pretty compelling short biography of Bonhoeffer.
He could have been a man from the future who built a time machine to go back and kill Hitler, as the joke goes, and then he almost did it.
I would watch that movie.
So it seems like a lot of it is like a lot of your focus right now is on masculinity, or I guess not masculinity. Yeah, the operating as a man, and then like the softening process after a life of conventions with monster trucks and AK-47s as symbols of manhood. But it doesn't matter. We're all influenced by this patriarchal idea of manhood. What draws you to that specifically? Is it innate or the unfolding of your own life?
So I never felt like I fit in that in the paradigms that were offered to me within evangelicalism, and I I was called a metrosexual in college. I don't know if you remember that one.
I remember
Um,
that one.
And I think back now how silly it is that, like, the box for patriarchal masculinity is so small that, like, a straight guy who just cared about how he dressed, they're like, well, we've got to come up with a new label for this. This is off our map, Like, this can't just be heterosexuality. He wants to smell good. We've got to come up with a new name. And so any level of stepping outside that box was punished. Even a small punishment like being called a metrosexual, I don't know if they meant it as a compliment. I didn't take it as that. It didn't feel good to be called that because it was alienating in some way. You're not a regular guy.
Yes.
And so after college, I actually joined the Marine Corps, to everyone's surprise. People ask me now, oh, happy Veterans Day, by the way.
Yeah, happy
um,
Veterans Day then to
yeah,
you.
hoorah. No, I'm just kidding. People ask me, like, why I did that, and because they were really taken aback. I wasn't like a very militant person. I wasn't that person. Typically, you can tell like which guys are going to join the Marine Corps. You know what I'm saying? Um, and I was not on anybody's radar. But I think there was a level in which I was trying to prove myself and my masculinity that I could belong in that way. Um, and so, although I don't regret joining, I learned a lot from the experience. It's, every step in my journey is part of as what's made me who I am today, but I wouldn't do it again. And I don't think I did it for reasons that were authentic to me, really. They were, many of our decisions in our early 20s are about trying to
Yes.
carve out some sort of identity that gets the approval of others. And so I can see that for what that is now. And so, yeah, I think in stepping out of evangelicalism, I feel that I've learned so much about how those systems, which, one of the reasons I speak out like online about things like white supremacy, queer phobia, the patriarchy, the ways that these things hurt women, queer people, pretty much everybody, that the world that we've built is for straight white men. And one of the reasons I talk about that as a straight white guy is that these systems, I have the privilege to talk about them without having been the one that was brutalized by them. And as a result, I think in some ways it's less triggering for me. I don't think that trans people should have to stand up and fight for their ability to be seen as human beings. Like I want to do that too. I mean, they can obviously if they want to, but it's just so unfair to have to stand up to people who don't believe that you're human and fight for humanity. And there's have you heard of Mark Driscoll?
No.
Don't worry about it. He's a really evil evangelical. He was famously a megachurch pastor at Mars Hill Church, and his ministry imploded, but then he restarted. He kind of just left his imploded ministry and restarted in Phoenix, Arizona, and now is like bigger than ever. He's hosting the Charlie Kirk show, et cetera, et cetera. But he had this expression that came out when his church imploded, where he was basically saying there's bodies behind the bus, the Mars Hill bus, that was the name of his church. But he was saying that was a good thing. Like, we're just going to keep going despite the bodies. Like, and he got caught on tape talking about this. So when I think about the way that the church has a lot of bodies behind the bus, women, queer people, black people, people that were excluded. And I was not one of those bodies. I was somebody that bus was built for. They had a seat for me on the bus. And I got off the bus when I realized we're running over a lot of people. And I need to get off this bus. Not because I was one of those bodies, but because I didn't want to be on a bus that was crushing people anymore. And so one of the reasons I talk about this is for the people, for the bodies behind the bus, but also a lot of those men that are sitting on that bus don't realize how much it's hurting them to stay on that bus, that we weren't made for this. We were made for love and connection, and you are depriving yourself of humanity by staying on a bus like that. And I feel, even though I experienced in my exodus anxiety, depression, fear, loss of identity, a lot of that, on the other side of that, I do feel more authentic to myself than I've ever been, and I do feel liberated in many ways. And I do want that for other men. I want their liberation as well. Liberation not just for the oppressed, but for the oppressors, because we are not free when we are sitting at the top of these kind of hierarchies of domination. And so that's why I talk about that, because in stepping out of that, gained so much. I lost a lot, but I gained the things that matter, like the things that life is about, that like we're here for. I gained those things, and I wouldn't trade it.
It's awesome. And I think maybe you'd even wouldn't have been experiencing as much of that anxiety and stuff if there was a softer world waiting for you, the world that you're wanting, and the world that you're stepping toward. And so, yeah, being a part of softening that world and restructuring it, it's commendable because, as I look out, as I gaze into my algorithm, you're talking about straight white guys. There actually aren't that many willing to talk about male vulnerability on the internet, especially now. The first book you brought, I'm curious to hear more about it because there are so many ceremonies baked into a lot of cultures toward manhood because we don't have a physical delineation like a woman does to sort of step into that new phase of our lives. It's a more gradual, uneven thing. And in our
Yeah.
society, especially, it seems like there are no ceremonies. The only initiation is which direction a teenage boy's algorithm sends them, or even prior to the social media, which movies they get drawn to and TV shows, which sports they play, how lucky are they with the male leaders in those sports. If they don't play sports, what does that make them? Even music, all those things were super like machoized, like rock and roll and all these things. And as a man with any sort of sensitivity operating under that structure, you do feel an emotional incongruity within yourself, within your own nervous system. And somehow you're not even close to yourself. You're performing a character, and performing a character is exhausting, even if you enjoy the character you're playing, which I don't know how many people do. So I'm just adding to that. You got me pumped
I
up.
love that.
That's what I'm saying.
No, you'll like this book. I think you'd enjoy it. There's a lot of people talking about masculinity right now. I guess the sort of straight white guy that's getting the big platform at the moment is Scott Galloway. I haven't read his new book, Notes on Being a Man. Have you heard about? I'm assuming you know who I'm talking about, right?
He's come across my way. I have mixed feelings about what I've seen of him.
Yeah, same. Yeah, he's a really interesting one because I like half of what he has to say, and then half of what he has to say, I'm like, you're almost there, but like, I still feel like he's really centering men and using some of the old paradigms to attract men while trying to subvert them in ways, which is good. But I feel like it's kind of a classic case of like keeping the system and just trying to reform it just a little bit is maybe what he's
Yes.
doing. And I haven't read his book yet. So that's just really from like internet clips is what I'm speaking to there. So I do have to read that. I do think that a lot of the fear whenever I talk about this, sometimes the critiques that I'll get is, oh, like men are never going to hear what you're saying because you're going too hard on them. And so that's, I guess, where Scott Galloway is maybe I think he's of the moment because he is really framing things in a way that they'll be heard by men. But at what cost? I guess it's like you still kind of have to center them and coddle them. And I am sick and tired of coddling men a little bit because nobody coddled me. Like, that's not how I got free. I didn't get free by being coddled. I got free by being like having a rude awakening in many ways with what I was a part of and what I was doing. And like other people's humanity should be enough reason. I'm sorry. Like if like it doesn't why do we have to just talk about what's good for men? I actually think that for me, what's good for men is not hurting other people. Like, because what's good for all of us is to connect with each other in authentic ways. And we are robbing ourselves of our meaningful connections by insisting on a world that's built centering us. And I'm just tired of that. So I don't know. I guess I probably don't maybe center men enough. And maybe I can get away with that a little bit because I am a straight white guy. So I can probably say things straightforwardly to men that maybe couldn't be done quite by people that might hold some marginalized identities. So I don't really pull my punches in that way. But as a result, I probably won't get the platforms that Scott Galloway has.
Yeah, well, he's operating under an incentive structure, which is what drives capitalism. It's this idea that there's always this little treat for you if you behave, and in his he is yeah he's doing something that I don't trust, and he's also kind of victimizing men instead of delivering a message that they need to hear, like you're saying. So
Totally.
I'm on team Brian Recker. So
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I haven't had his, he's obviously, he's got like a doctorate in this stuff, and I haven't even read
Okay.
his book, so I want to be cautious. But
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen a lot of aggrieved men, a lot of aggrieved men in my life, and I do what I can to combat that and model a different behavior and different structure. But yeah, it's actually easier to feel aggrieved and feel victimized and keep yourself centered instead of looking at, okay, what are the forces? What are the structural forces that are making us feel this way? And do they have to be this way?
yeah,
And what would I be willing to give up to feel more like a human? And that's
yeah,
hard.
that's, well, yeah, divesting from those systems is hard. And, that's what ultimately like I didn't know that I was doing that when I resigned. I was just like, I can't keep existing in this system. I need to find but like when I got out of it, that was the divesting that I really needed. I had to quit my job, and there was a financial loss, there was a security loss, there was a loss of a network of relationships. That was what my job experience was in. I've got a master's in ministry, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to put that to work. So there was a big loss there, but like, I think that it kind of takes that loss to wake up. And man, I had this moment. I was driving the other day. This was just a few days ago. My mind was wandering. I don't know, but I was just like imagining like how nice this is. I was imagining how nice it would actually feel to just be like, yeah, what if I was a capitalist? What if I actually just was like, yeah, that's capitalism is good, greed is good, and I should just go full tilt. That's what the world needs actually. And like I let myself like feel that for a second, and I was like, wow, that would actually feel really like that would feel really nice to just be like the world as it is actually fine and it's built for me and that's a good thing. Like there was something very when I let myself like feel that for a moment, I was like there would be something very comforting about that. But it's this pleasant illusion. And waking up from it is jarring, but and there's a lot of costs associated with it. But first of all, you find yourself I love what you said a minute ago about like, yeah, you can make the world softer for others. And in some ways, that's what I am trying to do. And I hear from people all the time that are leaving the church that it's like, man, thank you for your voice. It made it feel safe for me to do this. And it's like, if I can just do that, that feels like enough. That I can make a softer landing place for others to take those kind of steps, divesting from these kind of systems too.
That's a noble path, and you there's distinctions from what I understand between leaving the church but still practicing your faith and finding new pathways with it. Is that sort of where you're at? I want to finish your book, but I just got it a few days ago, so I'm catching up
Yeah,
on you.
so I still call myself a Christian, although many people in my comments would argue with me about that. Um, but for me, one of the cool things about being a Christian is there's no authenticating body that can decide if I am or not. That's just a personal decision. So fuck those guys, I guess, who say that I'm not a Christian. Like, it's not your job to choose that. The reason I'm a Christian, even though I'm not the same kind of Christian that I was, and I don't believe all the same things that I did, I don't think that Jesus died on the cross as like a transaction to appease a bloodthirsty God so that I can go to heaven when I die. That's not the Christian story that I embrace. I choose that label still because I still, I mean, I'm a spiritual person, I still believe in God. I haven't been able to shake that belief in God. And I don't believe in God in order to go to heaven when I die. I literally, sometimes people ask me, why aren't you an atheist now? Like, why, in your deconstruction, why not just be an atheist? And I just have a really simple answer for that. And it's that I just honestly still believe in God. Like, that's not because I feel like I have to or God's going to punish me if I don't. It that makes sense to me. That belief still feels right, and I've had experiences that make that belief feel right, not in a way that makes me think badly of atheists. That's their experience of the world, and for me the experience of the world makes sense with God in it. And when I think about what that's like and I look at Jesus, the way that Jesus related to God makes a lot of sense to me. And so I'm a Christian because not because I believe everything that every Christian has ever taught or every historic Christian doctrine, but the spirituality of Jesus is the one that I still want to emulate. The way that Jesus related to people is the way I'd like to relate to people. The way that Jesus thought about himself and connected to himself is the way I'd like to think about and connect to myself. And ultimately that relationship with God that Jesus had is what I'd like to emulate. So I still seek, probably imperfectly in many ways, but I'm seeking to model my spirituality after Jesus is. And so that label, I'm happy to hold on to it. If and another, there's also a stubborn element to it that, like, you know, it's the largest religion in the world. I think it's is it one third? I want to say about one third of the global population would consider themselves Christians. Um, and the world would be a better place if they were on the whole better. and and I hate if that the Christians in America especially are so defined by Christian nationalism. I mean, Donald Trump in many ways is the face of Christianity, and the vision of Jesus that they have is so ugly, so repellent, and so different from what I actually find in the person of Jesus. And so for me, there's a bit of a rebellion where I don't want those people being the primary ones representing who Jesus is, because I think he's better than that. And so I'm still on that soapbox for now. I don't think that everybody has to be on that. Like, I don't think that people who are like, yeah, Jesus isn't really a part of my spirituality at all, I don't think that that makes me better than them or that their spirituality is lesser than. I think there's all kinds of ways to connect spirituality and the divine. And for me, the way of Jesus was the one that I was introduced to when I was very young. And even though I've discarded a lot of it, that's still the language. It's almost like a first language. It's a language in which I learned spirituality, and it's hard to get away from. And I don't feel the need to culturally appropriate Buddhism in order to like be spiritual. When you actually go to the person of Jesus and not just American evangelicalism, the good stuff is there. And that doesn't mean I can't still explore other traditions, but I still feel kinship and within the tradition that I was raised in. So I'm still, and I don't feel like I need to say that that's going to be forever. This isn't, because once you undo, that's one of the nice things about deconstructing hell and punitive theology. This isn't about being right. I want to be my most loving self. And so I don't believe things because I'm convinced that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. I try to find the beliefs that I'm holding are the ones that help me feel most connected to myself, feel most whole, and feel most loving. And if my beliefs and love leads me away from that Christian tradition, that won't be the worst thing that could happen. I'm not afraid of that. That's a question that I get a lot from people deconstructing. Sorry, I'm almost, I know I rant sometimes, but people sometimes ask me that are deconstructing, they'll say like, "What? I'm afraid because I started deconstructing, and what if it all falls apart? What if I'm not a Christian at the end of this?" There's like a real fear there. And I try to always say like, if that's where love leads you, like that's actually fine if that feels what's authentic to you.
Yeah. No, it's hard with remote podcasts to tell when someone's done talking. So that's often what I have to
I'm
edit
almost
when
never done talking, Josh.
I think a lot of people, it's just really nice for them to hear that message of where you're at and how you're approaching it. And as I was listening to you saying that Jesus was your first language, it reminded me of how I attempted to read the Bible not too long ago. Actually, because we were in a FEMA hotel during the wildfires, we got evacuated, and there was a Bible in there, and I was like, okay, I think now's about the right time to try to find God. And I didn't finish because it got like very prescriptive. About 100 or so pages in, it felt like God wanted me to build an IKEA cabinet, and I didn't want that, and I'm not good at doing that. But anyway, it leads me to a really shallow question, if you'll indulge me.
Love it.
Have you read the entire Bible?
I actually have. Yeah,
Okay.
I have, and I know exactly which part you're talking about. There's a lot of building instructions there towards the beginning. I did. I probably. So I've read through the Bible multiple times, but I've skipped parts most of the times. But at least one time, I was very legalistic and I refused to skip any parts. So the other times that I've read through it, I skipped those parts. So there are certain parts of the Bible that I have only read exactly one time because I didn't feel any reason to go back and read them again. But I always felt guilty about that, by the way, because I was raised with the inerrancy perspective that it's all equally important, powerful, God-breathed, inspired. I no longer believe that. I think that those passages are really interesting historically, and you can draw even interesting things from what was going on in the wilderness when God gave them instructions to build a tabernacle. Like you can even do some symbolic things with it and, some archetypical things with it. But I mean, it's boring as shit. Like, let's be real.
So it's cool to bounce. I mean, there's no rules, but it still feels significant even just bouncing around, right?
Yeah, I am. And if somebody, I mean, sometimes people do like want to know where they should start if they were going to read the Bible. And first of all, I would say like, I don't think that you need to read the Bible to find God. But if you're the Gospels are the stories of Jesus, and my favorite one is the Gospel of Luke. I think Luke has my favorite parables in it, like the parable of the prodigal son, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Luke is the most anti-capitalist gospel. It's the one where you have the Magnificat, which is where Mary sings a song about God throwing the rich and powerful off of their thrones and lifting up the humble, feeding the hungry. The Luke and Matthew both have beatitudes. You know, the beatitudes where Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, blessed." But Luke's version also has the woes. So Matthew just has all these blessings on vulnerable people, but Luke's version includes the blessings and then also says, "But woe to you who are rich, woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry." So basically, he also does this so Luke is kind of the most anti-empire of the gospel writers, and so that's the one that kind of speaks to me the most at this moment in my life.
Yeah, me too. That sounds rad. My friend Jeff Loveness, who was a guest on the show, he's a screenwriter. He grew up religious, and he said the same thing. You know, he said, "Get to the Gospels. It gets fun. You get into some not lighter stuff, but brighter stuff or something." So it's just, you know, as a reader, and also understanding how this book has informed so much of what I've read, not even growing up religiously. There's a level of guilt not reading it, even though I have no personal familial duty to it. So yeah, it's fascinating how baked in all those things are to our culture and even our culture as readers.
Yeah, I mean the King James version of the Bible, just from a literary standpoint, you know, is the most influential book that's ever been published. Just like in shaping our language. I don't think you should read. Well, you could read. I mean, you're a reader, so you might want to read the King James just for that sake. It's not the most accurate translation. There's been a lot of advances in translation since then. But yeah, I do think that you know it's not all weighted equally for me, and like even you always pick and choose. And the thing is, Christian tradition has picked and choose. You know, like the classic famous John 3:16 is like the most famous Bible verse. And I think sometimes about how if we would have treated Luke 4 like we treat John 3, what kind of different Christianity we would have. Because in John 3:16 kind of sounds like that transactional gospel. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. This idea that the whole thing is about believing in Jesus so that you can go to heaven. That's what that verse sounds like. Now, I don't actually think that that's what that verse means. I think that everlasting life is a lot more than going to heaven. I think that you could really find a spiritual meaning in there of, you know, believing in love and living for the things that matter most in this life. Like you can kind of draw a more beautiful spiritual meaning. But that transactional gospel became the main thing. Luke 4, Jesus announces his ministry and says what he's all about. And he says, "I have come to preach good news to the poor, liberation to the oppressed," and like he says that's why I'm here. And so like if that was the center, like so we do kind of end up picking and choosing, and it is of course not surprising that the things that have been picked to be central were not the things that caused massive upheaval in the way that we've structured the world. Instead, it is things that really push us to sort of a pie in the sky theology that allows the exploitations of the world to continue.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you're speaking my language. And it's fascinating how we can arrive at similar conclusions about how you and I view the world, but coming from two totally different directions. I think there's something to that, landing and locating, finding yourself in the same location. Something profound about hearing you talk about it from where you arrived to, you know, I just grew up kind of a feral kid, you know, structureless in
What
a lot of
caused
ways.
you? I, I would love to know in your story, like what were some of the things that shattered the frame that caused you to maybe step out of some of those scripts as a young American boy to be anti-capitalist? That's not what's given to us, you know? There's a shift that has to
No,
take place.
yeah, exactly. And like I said, I grew up in LA, grew up around a lot of wealthy people, a lot of movie stars, kids, you know, and so that actually seemed even more attainable to me. My mom pushed me toward Hollywood when I was young and child acting, and I'm a failed child actor. And then I started writing scripts and just hung around that city forever. And by doing that, you know, I discovered what I actually loved about that city, which was the ocean and the mountains and the friendships and the just relationship I had to the physicality of the place. But yeah, also through the disillusionment of my attempts at industry, and then the ongoing process of self-education through reading. And the reading really is like a trail of breadcrumbs until, you hear about, okay, A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And then you read the first 100 pages of that and you're like, okay, this is making me too angry about what actually likely has been occurring to get us to this point. But this other book is a little more palatable on the subject of US history, and I could get there. And then, yeah, the people you meet along the way and how they teach you things and hear about things from them. And then, yeah, the exposure to people I knew with a lot of money and how that manifested in their lives. And then just the structural shape of things. And like I said, the incongruity. I grew up around a bunch of like macho dudes. It was, early 2000s. It was very much learning lessons about manhood from a bunch of other teenagers who learned from the one drunken Vietnam vet who shouldn't have been hanging around them as long as he did, out catching waves, surfing, and then you're around that, and that was a really sort of that never felt right, and so then I swung the other way, and started hanging out with like more artistic people, and say what you want about artistic people, but there is an ultra sensitivity there. It doesn't always manifest in the right ways, but to have a sensitivity to the world and to embrace that has always felt important. But yeah, it hasn't been a linear path. And yeah, there have been times in my life where I think I was performing manhood. And yeah, I sort of regret those times. Then seeing how that all folds in together over time, it's my mom growing up, she would always compliment me and tell me I was sensitive. And for a while that didn't play. But yeah, I think, there's also just something innate to, yeah, just sort of having a wishing there was a bit of a moral code to the world and hoping that it was a little more egalitarian and equal. It just feels better. It just feels better when things are aligned for people. And
Dude.
don't get me wrong, I say that, but like if someone almost runs me over on my bicycle, I'm cussing at them.
No, but
Whatever.
that's just true. I read recently a statistic that people in more egalitarian countries, or countries with low income or with low income inequality, where there's a smaller gap between the rich and the poor, countries with a smaller gap between the rich and the poor, the the rich people are happier there than in countries where they're richer, but there's a larger gap. So our country, the rich people are actually miserable in our country. There's been studies, this income inequality, even though they're very, very rich, they're not happy. And in the countries where there's a smaller gap, the rich people are happier. So it would actually be
Wow.
good for the rich people if they close that gap, because you actually don't, it's not good for any of us to be alienated from each other. And when you are in a society where you, like, I'm not rich, but if I was rich, I would feel probably a little guilty all the time. And I would be having to, I would have to compartmentalize the fact that I have all these privileges and people can't even afford healthcare. People have two jobs and they're having to do GoFundMe's to get a hip replacement. That's my friend. My friend Kevin right now has two jobs and has a GoFundMe for a hip replacement. Like that, like I couldn't be friends with Kevin if I had wealth that alienated me, that I would have to ignore that. I have to see Kevin's GoFundMe pop up and I would just have to be like, oh, that got nothing to do with me, because how could I enter in at any level with my humanity intact and not give away my money? And so it's not good for us, right? Like, we are
Right.
meant for this kind of togetherness, that we have built a society that has made it impossible for even the rich people to be happy.
Yeah, well, and to get that rich, you wouldn't be a person with friends like Kevin, because to get to that point, you'd have to deprive people of so much. And there was this great back and forth over the last couple days with the author Joyce Carol Oates and Elon Musk on Twitter. I don't know if you saw that.
No, tell me.
So basically, he's going off about you're not working hard, no one gave anything to me, whatever. And then Joyce Carol Oates, who's 87 years old, she writes, I find it fascinating that at no point does this person ever talk about a movie they love, a book they just read,
Ridiculous.
something their friends accomplished, something, someone they love, so on and so forth. And it is fascinating
Literally like
because
a
the bread,
show, like anything.
anything
Yeah.
and out external, and you're right, like citing that study that you did, because the other fascinating part is we're living in an age and in this country with such steep wealth inequality, it's never been worse, where the rich people are showing us how unhappy they are. They're not doing it behind closed doors. They're almost crying for help by being, they're like toddlers throwing worse and worse tantrums, waiting for us to storm their gates. And then also like the invincible victims, they're like in this weird state. In the bread and circus, they now want to be the circus too. So they're not even giving us bread like rich people used to do. They're trying to be the entertainers too, and they're horrible at it. And they come off
They have no
so stripped of
humanity.
their humanity. Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Donald Trump and all these people who just, they're shells of humans.
Yeah.
And yeah,
My
it's
girlfriend said it really well the other day. We were talking about this, and she was just like, "Can you like imagine?" Like, she was like, "What'd she say?" She said, Do you think when was the last time you think Donald Trump took his shoes off and just walked in the grass and felt it between his toes?" It's like, "Do you think he's
oh
ever done
wow.
that?" And I was like, "No, I don't think he's ever done that. I don't know if he's ever done anything like that."
Wow, grounding.
And I mean, just anything. It's so hard to picture him doing anything human. And one of the most common questions I get, and you wouldn't be asking this question because you don't have this background, but like if you're a Christian person and I tell you that I don't believe hell is a real place, that we've had apologetics for why hell needs to exist our whole lives. And so one of the things that they'll often ask is, well, yeah, what happens to Hitler? What happens to people that, or even Donald Trump? Like, what? Surely this guy needs to be punished, right? And I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but one of the things that I'll usually point out is that Trump, I don't think he needs to be punished when he dies. He is not happy. He is being punished right now. You don't treat people like that when you're okay. He's not okay. He's not living a deeply human life. He's missing out on what life is all about. And that to me is what hell is. So in many ways, I think Donald Trump is in hell right now. He's also creating hell for other people. And yes, there should be accountability, but I want that accountability to happen in this lifetime. I don't need him to burn a little bit in the next life. He hasn't lived a good or happy life. On his deathbed, you think he's going to be like, fucking nailed it. Boom, 10 out of 10 life. I don't think so. I don't
There
think so. I
was
think it's
some
actually very sad.
there was some really revealing moment that he actually had in front of some reporters about that very subject, and he admitted he didn't think he was going to heaven. And yeah, once again, remove the afterlife. That's him stating that he is a one of the living damned.
That's true. I think that's a very theologically true thing you just said, Josh. I christen you.
All right, I'm in.
You're in. You're in.
Damn, you're good. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. It's been great talking with you about this, especially from your angle. Your book Hellbent, like I said, it started great. I want to keep reading it. Even someone without a similar background, it's a really unique approach on the world, and I'm grateful that you're out sharing your life and how your life relates to other people. It's it's really cool. Glad we connected.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I have heard from quite a few non-Christians, atheists, people without a Christian background who have really enjoyed the book. And what some people have said is it was really helpful to, I mean, these are the people that are destroying our country right now, not just Christians, but conservative Christians are the main voting bloc that gave us Trump. And one of the really freaky things that a lot of people don't understand is how they are not just voting Trump like incidentally, but they are explicitly saying this is the culmination and fulfillment of our Christian duty. And so it flows out of their understanding of spirituality. It's not like it's not a side project to their spirituality. It's a result of their version of spirituality. And that's what the title really means. It's their whole spirituality is hellbent. It is rooted in disconnection and separation, not in flourishing. It is a spirituality of escape to the next world, not the flourishing of human bodies in this world. And I have had to reject so much of my Christian upbringing because so much of Christian spirituality, unfortunately, has nothing to do with the future of the planet, the future of the human species, the kind of societies we create. In other words, the most important questions. And it imports it all to the afterlife. And I'm not interested in a spirituality for the next life. I think this world is where spirituality happens. It happens in our relationships and our connections to one another and the kind of worlds that we want to build. A softer world, as you said. So yeah, hopefully some of that sounds interesting to folks, even if they're maybe not so sure if they need to deconstruct hell. Although I have a feeling many of us, it's in the zeitgeist. I'll say sometimes when I talk about this that I learned about hell when I learned about God. Those subjects were very intertwined. Maybe not for everybody, but for many people, Christianity has formed our vision of who God is and what God is, and hell was very central to that. So that punitive vision. And so, yeah, if I can help some people take that apart and hold on to a more meaningful version of spirituality, I'll be very pleased.
That's rad. What a great message, and thanks for sharing it with us. Yeah, I look forward to staying in touch and hearing more about everything you're up to.
Yeah, bro. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking to you. I've appreciated everything you're up to. I think you're also portraying a very healthy masculinity. We need more sensitive boys.
Trying. Have you read the Bell Hooks book, The Will to Change?
Yeah, that's one of my I thought about that being one of my two, but I thought it was too cliche. I had a feeling people have probably shared it already.
I bring it up almost every other episode. So I was like, don't bring it up. But I actually just on a
bring it
personal
up.
level,
More men need to read that.
Yeah,
Everybody needs to read that
if
book.
you have. I agree.
I should reread that one as well. But no, if you like that book, you'll like Richard Rohr's book. It's just a different angle, and also he'll use different words, but I think you'll enjoy it even as someone who's maybe not from the Christian tradition. The way he uses Christian symbolism, I think will appeal to you as an outsider because he uses it in interesting ways that's better than maybe what you've seen. So, but also honestly, Will to Change probably gets you most of the way there.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll check it out. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Brian Recker. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening to another episode of Turek Books, and happy reading out there. Thank you for listening to another episode of Turek Books. Be sure to like, subscribe, thumbs up, any kind of thing that could help us get listened to or watched by more people. We really appreciated having you and hope to see you again next week with a new guest and plenty of books. Take care until then.